My name is Claire Ashworth. I am 34 years old. And on the morning of my 18th birthday, my father set two things on the kitchen table: a white envelope with my sister Brooke's name on it, and a suitcase, brown canvas. The latch on the left side had never closed properly. He placed his hand flat on the envelope and slid it across the table toward Brooke, without looking at me. Then he turned to me, picked up the suitcase, and set it at my feet. He said, "The world is your trust fund, Claire." He smiled when he said it, the particular smile of a man who has convinced himself that a philosophy is the same as a provision. My mother looked at her coffee. She did not look at me. Brooke's fingers curled around the edge of the envelope. She did not open it at the table. She pressed it flat against her chest and carried it upstairs, the way you carry something you already know the value of. I looked at the suitcase, at the latch that would not close. Then I picked it up and I walked out the front door. That was 16 years ago. But before I go any further, welcome to Velvet Revenge Stories. This is where ordinary women meet impossible families and find their footing through patience, principle, and one well-timed truth. If someone once handed you a philosophy when everyone else in the room was getting a provision, this one is yours. Drop a comment, subscribe, and stay with me. Because what happened 16 years later, on a Thursday in November at 11:42 at night, when my phone rang and I saw Brooke's name on the screen, is the reason I am telling this story. I need to back up, not just to that kitchen table, all the way to a yellow house on Meridian Avenue in Columbus, Ohio, where two daughters grew up in the same home in completely different families. My father, Richard Ashworth, built and sold 3 regional manufacturing companies over 31 years. He is 68 now. He walks into rooms with the particular authority of a man who has never once been told his idea is wrong by anyone who needed something from him. He is not cruel. I want to say that clearly. Cruelty requires intention. What my father did required only certainty, the unshakable belief that he already understood the shape of each of his daughters and had arranged the world accordingly. My mother, Patricia, spent 27 years being the most gracious woman in any room she entered. She organized things beautifully: events, dinner parties, the narrative of her family. She was very good at the narrative of her family. Brooke is 31 years old. She arrived into this family the way certain children arrive, already beloved before she had demonstrated anything worth believing in. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it with the precision of someone who observed it for 18 years at close range. Brooke has my mother's warmth and my father's confidence, and the particular gift of being the person in a room that everyone moves toward without knowing why. She is not a bad person. She is a person who was handed a world that was already arranged for her and walked through it the way you walk through a room someone else has lit, comfortably, without having to find the switches. I was the other one. The one my father introduced at business dinners with the phrase, "She's the practical one," in the particular tone that turned a compliment into a category. I was the one who fixed things, who read the fine print, who understood that the latch on a canvas suitcase that would not close was a metaphor my father had not intended, but had delivered perfectly. I left Columbus at 18 with $900 in a savings account I had built from 3 part-time jobs since I was 15. I drove to Pittsburgh in a 2003 Corolla with the broken latch suitcase in the back seat. I enrolled at Carnegie Mellon on a combination of merit scholarships and federal aid I had researched and applied for myself the previous January. My father had offered to co-sign a loan. I thanked him. I did not use it. I understood that certain kinds of help come with a ledger nobody shows you until you try to close it. I kept my own ledger. I always have. Let me tell you what I built. Because the building matters. Not as proof of anything, not to impress, but because the building is the story. The rest is just the moment when someone finally looked up and saw what had been built. I studied finance and computer science, a double major. I worked 22 hours a week throughout all 4 years, in the campus IT department, a bookkeeping contract for a small restaurant on Forbes Avenue, and late shifts at a data center on the north side. I graduated in 4 years. No extensions, no gap year. With a 3.8 GPA and $11,000 in a separate savings account I had opened in my own name at a bank in Pittsburgh that had no branch in Columbus, I was well prepared. I opened it there deliberately. I am a financial analyst. I understood, even at 22, that money you cannot explain to your parents is money you can actually use. I joined a boutique investment advisory firm in Pittsburgh at 22, junior analyst. Within 18 months, I had moved to a senior role. Within 4 years, I was running a client portfolio worth $63 million. By the time I was 30, I had been recruited twice, promoted 3 times, and had built a personal investment account that I reviewed every Sunday morning over coffee, the way my grandmother used to review her Sunday crossword, quietly, with full attention, and the deep satisfaction of someone working in a language they taught themselves. My family and I had a relationship that functioned the way certain machines function. It worked when the conditions were right and stopped when they weren't, and nobody looked closely enough at the mechanism to understand why. My father called on birthdays. My mother sent cards in her careful cursive on cream paper with small flowers in the upper left corner. Brooke and I texted occasionally. Surface-level things, the weather, a meme, the kind of communication that maintains a shape without filling it with anything. I noted all of it. I said nothing. I had been saying nothing about the kitchen table for 16 years. Not because I had forgiven it, because the table was not something that could be undone. It could only be understood, and I had understood it for a very long time. Here is what $200,000 does to a person who is not prepared to be the one who manages it. I am going to tell you this, not to diminish Brooke, but because the truth is the only version of this story worth telling. Brooke received her trust fund on her 18th birthday, the way I received my broken suitcase, as a statement of belief. My father believed she was the kind of person a trust fund protected. He believed I was the kind of person who didn't need protecting. He was wrong about both of us. Brooke spent the first $40,000 in 3 years, a year abroad that extended into 2, an apartment in Barcelona, which she shared with people whose names she can no longer remember, and a business idea that required startup capital and evaporated the way first business ideas evaporate, with sincerity, with effort, and without a market. She came home at 22 with $60,000 left and the particular humility of someone who has learned something expensive. My parents helped her. Of course they helped her. They always helped her. A lease co-signed, a car replaced, and a second business idea funded with $40,000 more from the account that was supposed to last a lifetime. By 26, the trust fund was gone. Not squandered, not stolen, just spent. The way money gets spent when the person holding it has never had to build it. Brooke married at 28. His name was Jonathan Cole. He was a contractor, he was charming, and he was very bad with money, in the specific way of a man who is never made to account for it. I met him once, at a Christmas dinner in Columbus. I watched him talk for 40 minutes, without asking anyone a question. I noted it. I said nothing. I drove back to Pittsburgh the following morning, as I had a client meeting at 8. By 30, Brooke's marriage was in the particular distress of a structure built without accounting for load-bearing walls. I know this, because my mother called me in February of that year. She called at 7 in the evening. She settled into her chair. I could hear it, the particular quiet of her kitchen phone, and she said, "Claire, Brooke is struggling." I held the phone. I said, "I know, Mom." She said, "She needs someone who understands these things." She said these things the way she always said the things I understood, as if my understanding were a service, rather than a skill she had never once asked about. I said, "What does she need, specifically?" My mother gave me the number and the approximate shape of the problem. I wrote it in my notebook. I said, "I'll look at it." I did not say, "I'll fix it." There is a difference. I have always known the difference. I looked at it. What I found was not unusual. That is the most honest thing I can tell you about it. It was not dramatic. It was not criminal. It was simply the ordinary wreckage of 2 people who had built a life on the assumption that the money would always come from somewhere. Jonathan's contracting business had 3 outstanding invoices, totaling $62,000 from clients who had stopped returning calls. A home equity line of credit, drawn to 80% of its limit. 2 car payments. A credit card balance that had been carrying interest for 22 months. And Brooke's income, she was working in marketing, genuinely good at it, genuinely underpaid, was covering minimums, while the interest outpaced everything. I sat with the numbers for a long time. I thought about the kitchen table, the envelope, the suitcase with the broken latch. I thought about what it would have meant to receive $200,000 at 18 instead of a philosophy. I thought about the $11,000 I had saved myself by 22. The $63 million I was managing by 26. The personal account I reviewed every Sunday morning. I thought about all of it for exactly as long as it deserved. And then I put the thinking away. Because the numbers in front of me were not a ledger of what was owed. They were a problem. And I know how to solve problems. I sent Brooke a message on a Thursday afternoon. I said, "I've looked at the numbers. I have some thoughts if you want them." Her reply came 4 minutes later. She typed, "Please." Just that one word. And underneath it, a single line that arrived a moment after. I didn't know who else to call. I held my phone for a moment. I thought about the envelope. The white one with her name on it. The way she had pressed it to her chest and carried it upstairs. I thought about the world is your trust fund, Claire. And then I set my phone down. And I started writing. The most useful document I had ever prepared for someone in my family. Not because they deserved it. Not because the table had been made right. But because Brooke did not know how to read the numbers and I did. And some things are simply a matter of having the skill and choosing what to do with it. The document was 14 pages. I want you to understand what 14 pages means from a financial analyst who bills at $300 an hour. It means I took it seriously. It means I treated her the way I treat clients who pay me for exactly this. It means I decided that whatever had happened at that kitchen table was not going to change what I did with what I knew. The document covered 5 areas. First, the invoice recovery. 3 contractors in Jonathan's market had gone silent. I drafted demand letters for all 3. Not aggressive, precise. The kind of letter that says we know what is owed, and we know how to prove it. 2 of the 3 paid within 30 days. Combined, $41,000. That alone changed the breathing of the whole situation. Second, the Helic restructuring. I contacted their lender directly. Not Jonathan, Brooke. I had her on the call. I walked her through what to say and what to ask for. The lender offered a rate modification that reduced their monthly obligation by $412. I had Brooke write that number down. I made her say it out loud, $412 every month, because numbers you cannot say out loud are numbers you do not yet own. Third, the credit card. A balance transfer. 18-month zero-interest window. We moved the balance. We built a paydown plan that fit inside their current income, with room for 1 emergency per quarter. Fourth, Jonathan's business. This one was harder. Not the numbers, the person. Jonathan did not like being advised by his wife's sister. I understood this. I did not negotiate with it. I sent Brooke a separate document with everything labeled clearly. Then I called her. She picked up on the second ring. The silence before she spoke was the silence of someone sitting with a document they are still absorbing. Then quietly, almost to herself, "Nobody has ever talked to me like that." I kept my voice even. "Like what?" She exhaled slowly before answering. Like I was capable of understanding it. Something moved in the back of my throat. I kept it there. "You always were." I let that breathe for a moment. "Nobody showed you the language. That's different from not being able to read it." She went quiet again, the kind of quiet that has weight. Then her voice came smaller. The voice she used when she was saying something she had been carrying for a while and had finally decided to set down. She whispered, "Claire. Just my name." The way she said it at 7 years old, when she wanted to show me something she had found. I waited. She replied, "I'm sorry about the birthday." I knew exactly which birthday she meant. There was only one birthday. There had only ever been one birthday. I kept my voice steady. I replied, "I know you are." She swallowed. I could hear it. She asked, "Did you know what was in the envelope?" I looked at my window, at the November light going gray. I replied, "Not exactly. I knew it wasn't a suitcase." A short silence. Then the kind of breath people take before they say something they cannot take back. She confessed, "He gave me $200,000. I replied, "I know." She paused. She added, "And he gave you a suitcase with a broken latch." I replied, "Yes." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. That's not fair. No, it wasn't. And then, quieter still. So quiet it barely made it through the phone, she whispered. I spent it all. I replied, I know. What came next was barely a whisper. And you built. She stopped. She didn't have the number. She only had the shape of the distance. I finished it for her. I replied, I built what I needed to build. Her voice steadied slightly. Using what? I looked at the statement on my screen, at the numbers, at my own reflection faint in the dark of the laptop screen. The world, apparently. Brooke laughed, a real laugh, full and sudden, and slightly undone at the edges. The kind of laugh that is also the beginning of something else entirely. Phase 1 was the financial restructuring. By the end of 6 months, Brooke and Jonathan's situation had changed shape. Not fixed, not resolved. Changed shape. The way a broken thing changes when someone has stopped ignoring it and started working on it. The invoices were covered. The helic was breathing. The credit card was moving in the right direction. Jonathan still didn't like me. I noted it. The drawer in my mind, where I kept things that were true but unhelpful, stayed closed. Phase 2 began on a Thursday in November at 11:42 at night, when my phone lit up on the nightstand. Brooke. I picked it up. She was crying before I said anything. Not the soft kind, the kind where the breath comes in pieces and the sentences can't finish themselves. I sat up. I put my feet on the floor. Her name came out of me before I decided to say it. Brooke. A sound came back, somewhere between a word and just air. I commanded, talk to me. Then, like something she had been turning over for weeks and had finally chosen to put down, flat underneath the crying, stripped of everything but fact, she whispered, he's been moving money. I turned on the lamp. The room came into shape around me. I asked, how much? Not a question. She told me the number. I closed my eyes for 1 second. 1. Then I opened them. I asked, how long? She replied, 14 months. My voice stayed level, the way it stays level when the number is bad and the client is already frightened. I inquired, do you have access to the statements? A pause, the small catching sound of someone collecting themselves. She replied, I do now. I ordered, send them. Brooke. My voice dropped, the tone I use when I need someone to move through their fear and into the action on the other side of it. My laptop was open on the desk. I heard her moving. I heard the particular sound of someone doing something purposeful in the middle of falling apart. The email came through while she was still on the phone. I opened it. I started reading. I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, okay, I've got them. She said, is it bad? I said, it's a pattern. Not random, consistent. Which means it's documentable. She was very quiet. I said, Brooke. She said, yeah. I said, I need you to do something before you go to sleep tonight. She said, what? I said, I need you to change the password on every account that has your name on it. Every one tonight. She said, okay. I said, and then I need you to sleep, because tomorrow I am going to show you exactly what he did. And once you see it clearly, you're going to know exactly what to do next. She said, how do you know I'll know? I said, because you called me, not mom, not dad, me. You already know more than you think you do. You always have. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, the world really was your trust fund, wasn't it? I held the phone. The lamp was on. The statements were open on my screen. The numbers were clean and legible and utterly damning. I said, it turned out to be a pretty good one. She made a sound that was somewhere between crying and laughing. I said, change the passwords, then get some sleep. I'll have everything organized by morning. She said, okay. I said, Brooke. She said, yeah. I said, I've got you. She exhaled. Long, slow. The exhale of someone who has been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and has just been offered a surface to set it on. She said, okay. She said it quietly, like a door closing on the version of the evening where she was alone with it. I stayed on the phone until I heard her breathing slow. Then I hung up, and I turned to the statements on my screen. And I started working because the work does not stop. It never stops. You simply hold all of it. And sometimes, if you have built the right things in the right order for long enough, you hold it for other people too. That is not weakness. That is not the suitcase with the broken latch. That is what the world looks like when you have been living in it long enough to understand what it can actually hold. I had everything organized by 6 a.m. A full document, a transaction history, a pattern analysis, and a timeline of the transfers with corresponding dates and the accounts they had moved to. A clean summary that required no financial background to understand was also included. The summary was organized into 3 columns: date, amount, and destination. The destination column was the one that told the story, a personal account in Jonathan's name only, opened 11 months before they were married. He had never closed it. He had simply stopped mentioning it existed. By 6:30, I had also prepared a second document. This one was not for Brooke. It was for her attorney. She did not have one yet, but she would need one. I had 3 names, all family law specialists in Columbus, all with track records in asset concealment cases. I sent Brooke everything at 7 a.m. with a message that said, "Read the first document, then call me. After you call me, call the second name on the list. Her name is Patricia Hale. Tell her Claire Ashworth referred you. I'll be here." Brooke called at 7:41. She had read it. I could tell by the sound of her voice, not crying, not collapsing, the flat, clear tone of a woman looking at something she now completely understands and can no longer unknow. She said, "He's been doing this the whole time." I said, 14 months is what the statements show. She said, "How much total?" I said the number. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I need to call Dad." I paused. I said, "You can, but call Patricia Hale first." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because once you call Dad, the conversation will be about him. Call the attorney first, make it about you first." She was quiet. Then she said, "You always do that." I said, "Do what?" She said, "Say the exact right thing at the moment when I need it most. And I don't understand why you're still doing it. After everything, after the birthday, after all of it." I looked at my window. The November light was coming through, gray and low. I muttered, "Because you called me." And the skill doesn't stop working just because the table was unfair. Brooke made a sound I recognized, the slightly undone sound of someone assembling themselves out of something they were not ready for. She said, "I'm going to call Patricia Hale." I said, "That's good." She said, "And then I'm going to call Dad." I stated firmly, "That's good also." She replied quietly, "Claire." I murmured, "Yeah." My throat felt tight, but I managed a nod she couldn't see. She breathed. "When this is over, when it's really over, I want to hear about everything, your work, your account, all of it, everything I never asked about." I held the phone for a moment. The lamp was on. The documents were still open. The November light was still coming through, gray. I said, "I'd like that." She said, "I'll call you tonight." I said, "I'll be here." Like they always say, the people who are handed the easier start and the harder road simultaneously always find out eventually which one actually prepared them for the distance. The trust fund was gone in 8 years. The suitcase with the broken latch is still somewhere in my apartment. I keep it, not as a reminder of what was unfair, but as a reminder of what I could carry. It turns out to have been quite a lot. Patricia Hale turned out to be exactly what Brooke needed. Very precise. Very prepared. The kind of attorney who reads a document once and sees everything in it the first time. She called me 2 weeks into the case. Not to discuss the case. She couldn't professionally, but to ask one specific question about the transaction timeline in my analysis. I answered it in 4 minutes. She said, "You built this document well." I said, "Thank you." She pushed back. "Are you available if we need a financial expert to speak to the pattern?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I'll be in touch." She was. The case moved the way well-documented cases move, steadily in the direction of the evidence. Jonathan's attorney made 3 arguments. Patricia dismantled all 3 using the document I had built. The settlement took 4 months. I will not tell you the number. It is Brooke's number. What I will tell you is that she kept the house, that the account Jonathan had hidden was fully disclosed and accounted for in the final division, and that on the day the settlement was signed, Brooke drove to Pittsburgh and knocked on my apartment door at 2 p.m. with a bottle of wine and the expression of a woman who has walked through something enormous and come out the other side different. Not broken, just different. I opened the door. She held out the wine. She said, "I don't know how to thank you." I stepped back to let her in. I said, "You already did." She said, "When?" I said, "When you called me first. That was enough." She came in. I got 2 glasses. We sat at my kitchen table. Not the table in Columbus, my table, clean wood, 2 chairs, no envelopes, no suitcases. She looked around my apartment the way you look around a place when you are finally actually seeing it instead of just moving through it. She said, "This is beautiful." I said, "I know." She said, "You built all of this." I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "From the suitcase." I smiled. "From a suitcase." She was quiet for a moment. She poured the wine. She slid my glass across the table. She said, "Tell me everything." I looked at her, at my sister, at the woman who had been handed the envelope and had somehow spent 16 years not knowing what was on the other side of the table. I picked up my glass. I said, "Where do you want me to start?" She chuckled. "The beginning." I said, "The beginning is a suitcase with a broken latch." She muttered, "I know." I said, "The latch never actually mattered." She smiled. "I know that now." I looked at her. She looked at me. 2 women at a kitchen table in Pittsburgh, different from the one in Columbus, better than ever. I took a breath. I said, "Okay, I'll start from the beginning. My name is Claire Ashworth. I am 34 years old. I am a senior financial analyst in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I keep a suitcase with a broken latch in the back of my hallway closet. The world was my trust fund. It turned out to be a much larger one than my father knew. And on a Thursday in November at 11:42 at night, the person who got the envelope called the person who got the suitcase, not because she had to, not because there was no one else, but because she finally understood which one of them actually knew how to read the numbers. That is my story. 1 envelope, 1 suitcase, 16 years of building what nobody handed you, and 1 phone call in the middle of the night from the person who finally understood what she had been sitting across from the whole time. If this reminded you that the harder start sometimes builds the stronger foundation, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me what moment hit you hardest. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.